Olympus just announced the OM-1, formerly known as the WOW camera. This should be a lesson learned for anybody in marketing. Don't call your camera a WOW camera, the best camera ever, a camera that's going to wow if you don't think in a year's time when you release it, the competition isn't going to catch up to you. I think that the OM-1 is a truly amazing camera. It's a go-anywhere camera, any environment, rugged camera for adventurers and wildlife photographers. But I think a better name for this camera would have been the EM-1 Mark III successor, or the EM-1 Mark IV. The OM-1 takes us back 50 years. It's an homage to when Olympus came out with the OM-1 50 years ago. In a way, it's taking us back to the future, to a time when the OM-1 wowed with its capabilities. And they chose to show their love for the camera by releasing it on Valentine's Day. Although late at night, when many of us were probably celebrating Valentine's Day with our loved ones, nevertheless, a gift to us. So, Olympus, here's my gift to you. This video, this review video of the Olympus OM-1 from OM Systems. The camera does have a 20 megapixel sensor, and it is a BSI stacked sensor that gives us an extra stop at dynamic range and 2 extra stops of low light performance. It does have a flip screen that's 1.6 million dot, and the EVF has an OLED screen of 5.76 million dot. So very, very good high resolution EVF. I think only Sony beats them with a 9.44 million dot EVF. It has dual UHS 2 card slots. I would have loved to have seen CFexpress. This is their flagship camera after all. And while they're able to produce all the capabilities that I'm going to talk about with SD cards, being able to get them off the camera so much quicker would be a huge benefit. And as we've seen the price of CFexpress cards come crashing down, you can now get a 512 gig card or 160 gig card for $180 from Angelbird. That gives you much faster transfer speeds than a UHS 2 card. So CFexpress cards really would have been preferable, but still, dual UHS 2 cards, we can't really complain too much about that. But what this camera also has is an improved menu system, and this is a really big deal. It's a much simpler layout. It's very similar to what Canon uses in their horizontal layout. And for those areas that are grayed out, those capabilities that, well, I don't know why this is grayed out, well, Olympus actually tells you what it is and why it's grayed out. I love that. With Canon, sometimes I go like, well, I know I can't do it. Why can't I do it? And then you have to think, and you have to be basically a rocket scientist, because Canon looks at you and says, hey man, you're an expert. You figure this out. Now, one area where this camera truly wowed me is their autofocus system. Now, before I get into the different areas that are covered, I want to say this. With their autofocus system, it really does depend on the center point, how big it is. If it's a really tiny point versus a really large area, if it's a really tiny point, then it doesn't track very well if the subject's moving unless you keep that center point right on the subject. So if the subject moves off frame or close to off frame, you can lose the subject. So you want a wider area. But then it can do planes and different types of planes. It can do trains, freight trains and high-speed trains. It can do vehicles. It can do motorcycles. It can do cats, dogs, birds, humans. It's wow. When Nikon came out with their new improved autofocus system in the Z9, I was wowed there too. And then Canon came up with firmware update 1.5 in the R5 to take much of that and put it in the R5. And again, I was wowed. And to see what OM Systems has done with this camera, the OM-1, that truly is impressive. Now, they also took some of the computational stuff that was in the EM-1 Mark III and improved upon it. So the Live ND, where it had 5 stops, you now have 6 stops. And this is where another area where it wowed me. Okay, not that it does 10 frames per second mechanical. That's pretty serious. That's right up there with a Canon R5 that does 12. You're getting into the professional range, which is what a flagship camera should do. But once you flip over to electronic, it's capable of doing 50 frames per second. That's with autofocus, with metering, all that wonderful stuff. 50 frames per second. 50. I know, yes, you are limited to about 96 images raw. But think about this. Think of the Olympics. Imagine you're doing one of those, I forgot what the event is, but you go down the hill and you go over a jump and you do all this crazy stuff and then land upright. The amount of time that you're in the air, now just imagine you had a camera like this, holding down the shutter button at 50 frames per second at 20 megapixels, you're capturing the shot you need. You're getting that money shot, and that's a really, really big deal. 50 frames per second, all made possible with this backside illuminated stacked sensor. And yes, it's only 20 megapixels, but look at the Canon 1DX Mark III. This is where we used to be when it came to fast action sports cameras. And yes, I get it. It's not designed as a fast action sports camera, but that 50 frames per second when it comes to wildlife and other scenarios makes a huge deal. Now, some have made a big deal that it can do 120 frames per second. And yes, it can. But you lose metering and you lose autofocus. Now, there are some scenarios where this works really, really well, certain scientific type situations. And I'm going to get to the video in a minute because we've got some enhanced slow motion there too. But the autofocus system has been improved. We've got 1,053 cross-type autofocus points. And yes, I would have loved to see the buffer increase past 96 frames. But anybody that shoots a lot of fast action, high speed, whatever it is you're shooting, whether you're shooting wildlife, doing macro, doing sports, you generally don't, most of us don't hold down that button for many, many seconds, because what tends to happen is you end up with far too many shots. There are certain scenarios, like you're covering the Olympics, you're doing a jump. Yes, you want to hold down the shutter button and capture that whole sequence. But in a lot of areas, I think that 96 consecutive stills of RAW is going to be more than enough. And of course, if you're shooting JPEG, well, that number increases dramatically. But now for the video side of things. And this is where I want to talk about the GH6 and the OM-1. Prior to this announcement, I was kind of wondering which one was going to stand out being better than the other. And I think now we have a clear understanding of what that is. Clearly, the OM-1 is the best camera when it comes to stills. This camera is all about rugged, go anywhere, any type of environment, very cold, very hot, to capture those wildlife, to capture those landscapes, scenery. It is truly a go anywhere stills camera with very solid video capabilities. But I think as we're going to see with the GH6, it's going to cover off the video aspect. It's going to be a go anywhere video camera, although we'll have to wait and see some of the specs. It looks like as far as autofocus goes, the OM-1 clearly has Panasonic beat, but we'll just have to wait and see one more week and we'll know that for sure. In terms of video, the OM-1 can do 4K 60 frames per second full sensor readout, but there's no mention that it can do oversampled 4K, which to me is a bit of a letdown. Today, if you're dealing with this price point, there's very few cameras that don't offer oversampled 4K, the R6, the R5, and the list goes on. Oversampled, once you go north of $2,000 is kind of what is expected. With a 20 megapixel sensor, they certainly could do probably 5.7 oversampled 4K. We'll just have to wait and see. Now, in terms of frame rates, in terms of bit, log profiles, of course, it can shoot 8-bit 420. It can also shoot 10-bit 422 internal, and that's with 10-bit. And the log profiles should be better than what they were with the EM1. DP Review pointed out in one of their reviews, I think a year or two ago, how the skin tones were pretty bad and it was very difficult to grade. So hopefully, I would recommend watching their video because I don't have hands on this camera at this point, and I'd really trust Jordan to come out with a future video showing how this camera does perform with log, because I think log is very important. It gives us that wider dynamic range, and once you start shooting with log, you don't want to go back. That extra dynamic range, it's kind of like looking at a cartoon movie versus a real life movie. The depth is so much better. And as far as slow motion goes, in 1080, it can go up to 240 frames per second, which is really terrific. Now, one other area this kind of wowed me a little bit was its weather sealing. Unlike Canon and others that say it's weather sealed, or it's weather sealed to what you would expect with a 1 series versus a 5 series, the OM-1 is, well, they've got an IP rating. It's IP53, so essentially you can pour water on it and it should be safe. But as far as dropping it in your swimming pool for 30 minutes at 1 meter deep or 3 feet, yeah, I don't think we're quite there yet. But if you're in all weather conditions, if you're in heavy rain or anything like that, the OM-1 should satisfy with an IP53 rating. And you can go ahead and search IP53. The 5 is, I believe, water ingress, and no, I think the 3 is dust ingress. Let me try that again. The 5 is dust ingress, and the 3 is water ingress, and it's an international rating. But essentially, this gives us a more clear understanding of what we can expect, because to be certified as IP53 is a specific setting, specific details as to what IP53 must do. And so when you go into an environment, you can know what to expect out of your camera. So to sum things up here, Am I impressed with the OM-1, the OM Systems Olympus OM-1? Well, yes and no. I think it's a very, very solid camera. I think it's a very good stills camera, a go anywhere, lightweight, rugged camera that can shoot in all temperatures, all environments. I think Olympus's only mistake with this camera is they kept telling us it's going to be a wow camera. They kept communicating that week after week, month after month, from director down to managers, telling us this camera is going to wow us or it's going to have wow capabilities. And I think whenever you start off like that, it's like the Canon R5, they said how great it was, and then right at launch they said, oh yeah, and it overheats. And that overheat basically took everything they spent 5 months building up and blew everything away. But it's still a very, very solid camera. I think if you own the EM1 Mark III, you're going to look at this and think, wow, this is absolutely incredible. But this is the last time that the camera is going to be called Olympus. It's going to have that Olympus badging. And this is another reason why I think they missed an opportunity to call it the EM1 Mark IV. It's got the Olympus name on it. So what happens to the successor? It won't have Olympus on the top. Will it be the EM1 Mark III? Mark II? Sorry, Mark II? I don't know what they're... I'm still a little confused over their naming. They seem to be changing it far too often. And knowing that the Olympus name is coming off, we're going to get another name change very, very shortly. And this is a new company. This is a new company. If they're going to change the name, if they're going to remove Olympus off, that should have happened with this camera. This should have been the birth of that new company as it has risen from the ashes. But my conclusion, while I don't have this camera in hand, I am very impressed with the capabilities. I think it's a very solid camera, and at around $21.99 US, I think it's a pretty good deal. And if you're interested in buying this camera, I've got the link to it down in the description down below, where you can also get the full specifications from B&H and more verbiage. So click on that link to check out the camera. Now, there's one other thing I want to talk about before I end off this video. I am giving away 3 Angelbird CFexpress cards, the 512 gigabyte and the 160 gigabyte. And where these kick in is the 512 gigabyte is aimed at video users. It provides a minimum sustained write speed of 800 megabytes per second. I know what you're asking. Yeah, but Simon, how do I win? Okay, all you have to do is subscribe to this channel. And if you're already a member, if you've already subscribed to this channel, you're already entered. And I'll be having the contest at the end of the month. I'll probably come out with a winner on March the 1st, and the winner will get one of these 2 cards. Here's the thing. It doesn't matter where you live on the planet. As long as you are a resident of Earth and you have a mailing address, then you are eligible to win. You do have to be at least 18 years of age. So if you live on Alpha Centauri or on Mars or somewhere else in the solar system, I'm sorry, it's not eligible. Although I will offer local pickup if you are outside of Earth. If you're an EBE, I think I don't know what your nationality is, or Alpha Centaurian, I'll do local pickup. But back to the memory cards. The 160 gigabyte card is aimed at people who shoot stills. They want that maximum performance and durability, providing a 1480 megabyte per second speed. So you want to hold down the shutter button at 20 frames per second for 20 seconds? No problem. This card can support that. In fact, the 45.7 megapixel Nikon Z9 at 20 frames per second lossless burst puts out 1.2 gigabytes per second, and this can easily handle 1.5 gigabytes per second. And of course, on the video side, you got the 512 gig that can easily handle 8K raw video at 30 and 60 frames per second, whether it be the R5, the R5C, the 6K 60 on the R3, or the Nikon Z9's 8K 30, and later on the 8K 60. 800 megabytes per second minimum sustained write speed easily gives you that. So again, all you have to do is click that subscribe button, and I'll be conducting the contest, or the contest will end at the end of this month. I'll award a winner, ship it out, and then of course for the next 2 months I'll have another contest with exactly the same rules. So right now I have 2 160 cards and I have 1 512 gig card, and the winner at the end of this month get to choose, and then after that you might not get to choose. If the winner chooses the 512, I only have 2 160s left. Why am I giving these away? Well, Angelbird donated these to the channel. I just recently did a review of a whole bunch of cards that they released. A refresh of the AV Pro, so the Mark II AV Pros and the AV Pro XT Mark IIs, along with a 4 terabyte CFexpress card. And when they sent me all this stuff to review, they said, by the way, here's 4 extra CFexpress cards that you can give away to your audience. And so that's exactly what I'm doing. So go ahead and subscribe, but thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and post them in the comment section down below. I'll do my best to get through your comments throughout today and into the evening. But that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again soon.